Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to John.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening had come, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. So there's a couple of lessons that I take today from this gospel reading. And I'm going to put them more in kind of modern terms so that they will maybe ring true to you. Number one is that we often do the right thing only after exhausting all other possibilities. The other one is, the braver Jesus got, the luckier we get. So why do I say that? I say that because in this passage it's clear that the gospel tells us that for the disciples, the first possibilities are basically nothing. There's nothing that we can do. There is no possibility of feeding all of this people, much less ourselves. 5,000 people were there. So here's the braveness part of this formula for me. Jesus just said, probably without knowing exactly what was going to happen, "Make the people sit down. Just be still." So what did Jesus know that the disciples didn't know? I'm not sure. But I do know that in all the Gospels, Jesus heals. That is his primary role in carrying the Word of God to all of the people who need it, that he heals. The very first miracle that Jesus does in the Bible is at the wedding in Cana. And he turns jugs of water into wine because that's what the people thought they needed, or certainly they wanted it. And it was at the wedding of a very important person. And so there's a series called The Chosen, some of you know about. Mary Churchill turned me on to a couple of years ago. And the way that The Chosen, which is a little mini-series, the way that depicts that episode of Jesus turning the water into wine is that Jesus is standing there in front of this jug of wine, and Mary, his mother, has been speaking with him, and Jesus is trying to figure out, is now the time for me to demonstrate that I have the power to change things. Jesus needed to know that he had the power to change things. And he wanted to demonstrate that power. But imagine what would have happened if Jesus had tried to turn the water into wine and it failed everyone. His whole ministry would have been different, right? So Jesus is standing there with this jug of water and his hands around it. And in the scene, he's trembling. He's just almost shaking. Because there is still some doubt in Jesus' mind, I think. Who am I? What am I here for? What am I called to do for these people that are here? And then all of a sudden, you see the jar kind of moving a little bit, and lo and behold, someone comes and dips a ladle into it, and it's in fact wine. And Jesus is very relieved. Now, you may not think that's a really cool miracle. Other miracles are much more cool than that. But this is the first sign that Jesus is who Jesus proclaims he is. But in this lesson from the Gospel of John, we see that Jesus tells the people and the disciples, just sit down. And what does he do? The first thing he does is he gives thanks. That's what this says. It says he gave thanks. And then he served everyone. Not only did he serve everyone, he had more left over than when he started. So, what Jesus was doing by this lesson, I think he was telling his disciples and all who were there that they needed to give thanks for those 5 loaves and those 5 fishes. Turn their eyes away from what they didn't have, or what they hoped they would have, or what they wished for. Turn their eyes on what they had and give thanks. Now, the disciples are terribly overwhelmed by this problem. What are we going to do? How are we going to feed all these people? And they want a solution for the whole problem. Isn't that often what we do? We're not able to take the little steps that we need to take to make our lives better when we are overwhelmed by the larger issues that we feel we need to address. The disciples want a solution for the whole problem, and they see it as a problem that they can't even solve from the resources that they actually have in front of them. But Jesus wasn't focusing on the overwhelming nature of the problem. He focused on thanksgiving, giving thanks. And he focused on giving the bread and the fish to the people who were there. So when his team kind of runs into the wall, Jesus decisively takes charge of the moment. And we don't see any doubt or hesitation on his part. There's no question. He just takes charge and he plops right down there in the grass and serves these 500 people. And then what happens right after that? He's scurrying off. The people are crowding in on him. They want to declare him to be a king. That's not what Jesus wants. Jesus does not want to be a king. Jesus does not want to be a TV evangelist. He wants to go off to a quiet place and pray and be who he is. And after he scurries off, then we know that the disciples get into a boat, try to cross the lake or the sea, whichever one you choose, and figure out what they're going to do at that point. And then all of a sudden, there's more turmoil. And the boat begins to rock, and the waves begin to crash in on them. And the wind is blowing, and they're panicking after they've gone 3 or 4 miles. And Jesus shows up, and he says, "It is I. It is I. Do not be afraid." Jesus gave them what they needed, just like Jesus gave those 5,000 people what they needed in that moment. And I believe that's the point of this whole story, that Jesus gives us what we need, even if we are out in a wilderness place, even if we're out in a rocking boat, Even if we fear for our lives, Jesus gives us what we need. I have another story for you. Now, don't turn your eyes around and embarrass Renee, which she's sitting right there. She's a sweet, lovely woman, and I got the chance to have coffee with her the other day. And many of you know that Erin lost her mom about, June 11th, is that the right day? And I got to be with Ren's mom, who was 100 years old at the time. Got to speak with the family and visit with the family and pray with the family. And then I got to spend some long time with Ren's mom. And I felt that Ren was ready to say goodbye. And so, although Ren couldn't speak words, she could grab my hand. And she could do this. And I felt like she knew that I was there and that God was there with her. And so after being with Ren and saying some prayers for her, I texted Ruanne the following day. By the way, I've gotten Ruanne's permission to tell you all this. Thank you. I had coffee with Ruanne the other day and we had a really, really good chat. So I texted Ruanne the next day and I said, "How was last night? I prayed for your peace and the peace for you and your family. I hope you know that you have been the rock for your mom whenever she needed you. You can let go when you're ready." And I said, "I believe she is ready and at peace. I believe that God is ready for you to rest and entrust your mom to God's care. If you need me, feel free to call. I want to be present for you when you need it." And I said, "I love you and Karen so much." Right after that, I got a reply from Ruanne's text. "We love you as well." She waited for us to get up and then left. Ruanne has not been quite ready to come back to church yet until today. I didn't know she was going to be here when I began preaching this morning. She was not quite ready to come back, afraid of the sadness that she would encounter being here. And Ruanne told me something of her own faith journey that began about 40 years ago when she was camping, which is something that I love to do. There was an immediate connection with the story between Ruanne and me. She was camping and a friend there said that a faith journey is like jumping off the edge of a cliff, then finding a safe place just below that you can't see. And what it really is Jesus' outstretched hand waiting for you to jump into his arms. I think Ruanne and her friend are right. I also think that the disciples began to learn that in this lesson. Jesus said, "Sit on the ground, just watch." And so they did. They were able to do that. But guess what? That lesson didn't last that long, did it? Because the next thing is they're in this boat and they're freaking out again. And Jesus has to come reassure them and say, "Hold tight. I'm here." So that's what Jesus does. Jesus shows up and tells them that they have what they need. I think the disciples began to learn that, and that gave them the strength and the capability to experience the death and resurrection of Christ. It was a good day for me that Friday, having coffee with Ruanne, because afterwards I had lunch with some other friends from three other Episcopal churches in northern Westchester County, because we're talking about ways that we can pool our resources and our spiritual capabilities to help our churches flourish. And these are three churches that currently don't have, one of them doesn't have a priest at all. The other two have very part-time, limited, what they call supply clergy, which is very transitory. And in the discussion with them, we were talking about how can we help each other. And the thought occurred to me that was a repeat of the story that Ruanne had told me. How can we extend to you an arm of safety, a safe hand to hold on to, and be for you what you need? And then as I came back here to the church after that lunch, our food pantry was going right in the middle. It operates from 1:30 to 3, handing out bags of food to all people that come. And it was near the end of that. And by the time I got there, most of the big grocery bags full of food were actually gone. Normally when I get there at that time, there'll be several bags left. And so I said, God, you guys are really, giving away a bunch of food today. And all the people in the food pantry, yeah, I said, these people that are doing construction work on the power lines out here park their trucks down here. And we had a little guy that works in the food pantry. He was 25 years old, Max. And Max is at least 40 years younger than all the rest of us that work in the food pantry. And Max still there where he goes down and kind of directs the cars and how to go and follow the line. So these construction guys were on their lunch break. And they said, what are you doing? They said, well, we're handing out bags of groceries. And they said, well, can we get some of those? And Max said, well, I have to go check. So he comes up and checks and talks to the folks in charge. And they said, of course, you can have these groceries. So that my story goes, I was told the story, that they took the bags of groceries, put them in the cars of these construction guys. And when those guys left, while I was still there, and we were sort of cleaning up and getting rid of, I was sitting in the chair, they were cleaning up. These guys honked and waved and had the biggest smiles on their face that you can possibly imagine. And so they had made new friends. And it occurred to me that this was a repeat. This is a repeat, a real story. Give them what they need. Feed them. Let them know that I'm there. And that's our mission. It's our mission. And things always happen for a reason. It turns out that yesterday was our vestry retreat. So we met at Karen's house, and we all sat around and talked about how can we do to nourish the people in our parish? What can we do to nourish the community around us? And we were brainstorming, and it was a wonderful session. Karen brought a lot of food, that was great. And we all sat and tossed about ideas, and it was such a spirited, cordial, congenial group, and we all recognized that we had a singular purpose. And that singular purpose is something that we call our mission statement here at St. Luke's. And that mission statement is demonstrating God's love through Christ to the community and the world. And as I was contemplating that mission statement yesterday, we were emphasizing that mission statement. What are we here for? Why did you bring yourself to this church every Sunday? And I think it's because we all have that common mission, and we're trying to figure out what we can do to make it work. We are sometimes those two disciples, Philip and Andrew, and we're going, how are we going to do this? What resources do we have to fulfill this, what appears to be an overwhelming and giant purpose? How do we fulfill that? Well, the thing we do is we sit down, we be still, we ponder, we look to heavens, and we give thanks for what we have. And you say, God, give us the ability to turn what we have into something grander, to something that will be that outstretched arm of Jesus below that cliff that we jump off of. And in this time, with our attempting to recuperate from all of the turmoil of the last year and a half, and recuperating from what could be perhaps the closing of some parishes, what certainly will be the limitations of those parishes on what they can do for the people that they want to try to serve. So we are extending a hand in order to be able to do that. So when Jesus encouraged his panicked disciples in the boat to take heart, and says, "It is I. Do not be afraid." And that reminds me of how he must have felt when he was turning that jug of water into wine. That he heard the voice of God saying, "It is I. Do not be afraid. Take heart. You are not alone." So as we demonstrate God's love to the community and the world around us, here's what we do. We do what Mary told Jesus that day. And she said, "If not now,